Chapter 6. Jess was still processing Emily's behavior the next morning when she woke up. Emily lay in her bed reading from the Bible. Though Jess had seen nothing useful when she had glanced through it, something must keep drawing Emily back. She bit her lip as she watched Emily. Even after the hateful words Jess had spewed at her, Emily had stayed calm and resolute. She seemed to believe in something rather than trying to be perfect or pushy like other religious people Jess had met. "Why do you read the Bible every day?" The words escaped Jess's lips before she could stop them. Emily glanced up, a look of surprise on her face. "Well, partly because God told us to, and partly because it gives me peace. If something is ever bothering me, I can usually find peace in the Bible." "What do you mean? What peace? The only time I ever looked in one, I found it confusing." She chuckled and nodded. "Yes, some parts of it are confusing, but it's also one of God's ways of communicating with us." Jess chewed on her bottom lip, trying to understand what Emily meant. "You mean, like I ask it a question and let it fall open and I'll find the answer?" Emily shook her head. "No, it rarely works like that. It's not a magic 8-ball. What I mean is, the more you read it, the more things will become clear to you. Sometimes you might read something that answers a question you have, but sometimes you'll read something about trusting people, and a friend will tell you what you need to hear, or you'll read something that makes you pray for something or someone." She paused and pursed her lips. Then her face lit up. "Here, I've got an example. My parents wanted a baby, but for some reason they couldn't conceive. One day, after praying with their pastor at church, they passed a woman heading into an abortion clinic. My mother blurted out to the woman that she wanted her baby, and the woman paused and turned to them. She told my parents she had been wrestling with the decision to have an abortion and had asked God for a sign not to do it. You see, my mother calling out to her was that sign, and my mother is a very shy person. Calling out like that wasn't in her normal nature at all. That's a pretty big coincidence, don't you think?" Emily's eyes danced as she finished the story. Jess didn't know what to think, but she found herself wanting to believe it, to grasp onto something that might make sense in her messed up life. "Were you that baby?" "I was," Emily said. "Didn't you ever hate your mother? I mean, doesn't it bother you that she didn't want you?" Emily shook her head. "No, don't you see? My mother thought she was trapped. She couldn't afford to have a baby, and the man had left tread marks in his departure from her life when she told him she was pregnant. So she felt all alone. I'm one of the lucky ones. My mother wrestled with the decision and prayed about it rather than rushing into it, and God saw fit to send my parents into her path. If they hadn't crossed paths that day, I wouldn't be here today." "Does your faith really give you peace?" Jess asked. Though peace seemed foreign with her stained past, the thought was appealing. "Yes, but just reading the Bible won't give you peace if you don't know Jesus. The peace comes from Him. Would you like me to tell you some about Him?" Something deep inside Jess screamed yes, but her pragmatic mind still wouldn't accept it. She felt the wall going back up. "No, I don't have time for stuff like that. I just wondered why you spent so much time reading." Emily stared a moment longer, then she shrugged and turned back to her book. "Hey, it's Sunday. Shouldn't you be at church or something?" Emily glanced down at her watch and frowned. "Yeah, I should be. Jared should be picking me up soon, but I guess he's running late." "So that's your kryptonite." "Huh?" she asked. "Your weakness. Going places alone. I wondered what it was. You seem so perfect, but I knew there had to be something." Emily smiled. "Well, first off, I'm not perfect. I've never claimed to be. I'm just trying to do God's will. But yeah, walking into crowded places is pretty much my worst nightmare." Jess regarded her for a second, feeling a little bad. "Well, I hope he shows up." "You know, you could come with me," she said. "I don't do church." Jess reached for her headphones. It was time to end this discussion. "Have you tried?" she asked. "Look, all I'm saying is that whatever you're looking for, men probably can't supply. But Jesus, He can heal any pain you're feeling." Jess snorted and rolled her eyes. "Yeah, Jesus has never been there for me. I've always had to look out for myself." "Have you ever asked Him?" She opened her mouth to reply, but shut it again. A knock sounded at the door. "That'll be Jared," Emily said with a small sigh. "But I hope we can talk again soon." Her voice held a hint of sadness, as if she were almost considering staying to finish the conversation. But after a final glance Jess's direction, she grabbed her Bible and left. Jess glared ice at the closed door. Emily didn't know her, but even as the words formed in her mind, she realized at least a bit of it was true. Jess didn't have any close friends, and whenever loneliness struck, she did turn to men for comfort, though the comfort only stayed while the men were there. Still, that didn't mean she was easy, or whatever Emily had been implying. Jess flopped back on the bed, but the silence inched in on her. She tapped her fingers against the mattress and tried to think of something to take her mind off the loneliness. She had some homework. Maybe she could do that. Pulling out her psychology book, she opened it up to the chapter they were supposed to read, but the only thing popping up was Chad's face. With a sigh, Jess slammed the book shut, rolled over, and fished Chad's number out of her nightstand drawer. "Want to meet up?" She tapped the message in the phone, but then paused, trying to decide if she really wanted to send it. Desperation never looked good on anyone, and they had gotten together Friday and Saturday. Her finger hovered over the send button, and ever so stealthily, it tapped send. No taking it back now. The seconds dragged on as Jess waited for the return bubble, and the screen timed out and darkened. With an agitated swipe, she turned it on again. How long did it take to reply? The phone beeped. "Sorry, can't right now," popped up on the screen. Disgust boiled in Jess's stomach, and she tossed the phone down. What good was a friend with benefits if he wasn't available when she needed him? As the nervous energy built inside her, she paced back and forth in the room and decided she needed a smoke. Chad pushed the guilt away as he sent the text dismissing Jess. She was lonely, and he knew it. But seeing her 3 days in a row felt like starting a relationship, and he couldn't do it. Besides, he needed to prepare for classes the next day. The psychology class had a quiz coming up that he needed to write, but as he sat down at his desk, Jess's face kept popping into his head. The sadness in her blue eyes and the feel of her skin against his plagued his mind. She reminded him of himself, and he wondered what pain was in her past. He reached for his cell phone and paused. If he texted Jess, he would be sending her all the wrong signals. No, it could wait. He could wait. But he couldn't deny he enjoyed being around her, more than he had any woman in the past 2 years. Placing the cell phone to the side, he turned back to the psychology book, but his mind and his eyes wandered to the phone every few minutes. He wondered what Jess was doing. Ugh, he would never get work done this way. Slamming the book closed, Chad grabbed his keys and headed out the door, deliberately leaving his phone on the desk. If he didn't have it, he couldn't be tempted to call Jess, but maybe a ride would clear his head enough to focus.